It was a cold, rainy night when the cop first saw her. He was on patrol, driving slowly through the quiet streets of his small town. The rain hammered against the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. He wasn't looking for trouble, just making his usual rounds. But trouble, or maybe fate, found him anyway. As he turned a corner, his headlights caught a small figure huddled under a bus stop shelter. He slowed down, squinting through the rain. It was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, shivering in a thin jacket that was soaked through. Her hair clung to her face, and her shoes were falling apart. She looked up at him with wide, scared eyes as he stepped out of the car. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The cop sighed. He'd seen this before, kids left behind, forgotten by the world. He radioed for backup, but deep down, he already knew what would happen. She'd be taken to a shelter, passed around the system, and maybe, just maybe, find a home someday. But something about her silent, trembling figure tugged at his heart. When the social worker arrived, the cop learned the girl's name and a little of her story. She'd been abandoned by her mother, who couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. The girl had been living on the streets for weeks, surviving on scraps and kindness from strangers. The cop listened, his jaw tightening. He'd always been a man of action, someone who believed in doing the right thing, no matter how hard it was. "What's going to happen to her?" he asked the social worker. The woman sighed. "She'll go to a group home for now. But with so many kids in the system, it's hard to say if she'll ever find a permanent family." The cop nodded, but his mind was already made up. He didn't know how or why, but he couldn't let this little girl disappear into the system. He'd seen too many kids fall through the cracks, and he wasn't about to let it happen to her. "What if I took her in?" he asked suddenly. The social worker looked surprised. "You? But you're single, and you work long hours. Are you sure you're ready for something like this?" The cop hesitated. He wasn't sure at all. He'd never thought about being a father, let alone to a child who'd been through so much. But looking at the girl, he knew he couldn't walk away. "I'll figure it out," he said firmly. And just like that, his life changed forever. The first few weeks were hard. The girl was quiet and withdrawn, barely speaking a word. She flinched at loud noises and stayed close to the walls, as if she was afraid to take up space. The cop didn't know much about parenting, but he did his best. He bought her clothes, made her meals, and tried to make her feel safe. Slowly, very slowly, she began to trust him. One night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. "Are you going to leave me too?" she asked in a small voice. The cop's heart broke. He knelt beside her bed and took her hand. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, kid." For the first time, she smiled. It was small and hesitant, but it was there. A few months later, the cop was called to another case, a group of sisters, all under the age of 10, who'd been left alone in a rundown apartment. Their parents had disappeared, leaving them with nothing but a note and a few cans of food. The cop arrived to find the girls huddled together, scared and hungry. As he looked at them, he felt that same tug at his heart. He knew he couldn't save every child, but he couldn't leave these girls behind either. One by one, he took them in, just as he had with the first girl. His small house became a home, filled with laughter, tears, and the chaos of 6 little lives. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, tantrums, and moments when he wondered if he'd made a huge mistake. But every time he saw the girls playing together or heard them call him Dad, he knew he'd done the right thing. Years passed, and the girls grew up. They went to school, made friends, and slowly healed from the wounds of their past. The cop watched them with pride, knowing he'd given them a chance at a better life. But he never expected what would happen next. 20 years later, the girls returned home for a special occasion. They'd planned something big, something to thank the man who'd saved them all those years ago. When they presented him with their gift, the cop was speechless. It wasn't just a token of appreciation, it was a life-changing surprise that left him in tears. But that's a story for another part. For now, the cop was just a man trying to do the right thing. He didn't know it yet, but his decision to take in those 6 unwanted girls would change not only their lives but his own in ways he could never have imagined. And so, the journey of an unlikely family began, one rainy night, under a bus stop shelter, with a little girl who needed someone to care. The cop's small house, which had once been quiet and orderly, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, arguments, and the pitter-patter of little feet. 6 girls, each with their own personality and struggles, turned his world upside down. He wasn't just a cop anymore, he was a father, a teacher, a cook, and sometimes even a referee. The first girl, the one he'd found under the bus stop, was the quietest. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were thoughtful and kind. The other girls looked up to her, even though she was only a few years older than some of them. She had a way of calming them down when things got too chaotic, and the cop often found her reading stories to the younger ones at bedtime. The second girl was the opposite, loud, energetic, and always on the move. She had a knack for getting into trouble, but her mischievous smile made it hard to stay mad at her for long. The cop often found himself chasing her around the house, trying to keep her out of trouble. The third girl was shy and artistic. She spent hours drawing pictures of their family, always including the cop with a big smile on his face. Her drawings were taped all over the house, a constant reminder of how much they all loved him. The fourth girl was the thinker. She asked endless questions about the world and how things worked. The cop didn't always have the answers, but he did his best to encourage her curiosity. He bought her books and took her to the library, where she would lose herself in stories about science and history. The fifth girl was the youngest, barely 4 years old when she came to live with them. She was sweet and affectionate, always clinging to the cop's leg or holding his hand. She called him Daddy from the very beginning, and though it surprised him at first, he quickly grew to love the sound of it. The sixth girl was the toughest. She'd been through more than any child should have to endure, and it showed in her guarded expression and sharp words. She didn't trust easily, and it took months before she let the cop hug her without flinching. But beneath her tough exterior was a heart that longed for love and safety. The cop did his best to give them all what they needed. He worked long hours at his job, but he always made time for the girls. He helped them with their homework, cooked their meals, and tucked them into bed at night. He wasn't perfect, there were days when he was too tired or frustrated to be the father they deserved, but he never gave up on them. Money was tight, and there were times when he wasn't sure how he'd make ends meet. But the community rallied around them. Neighbors brought over clothes and toys, and the girls' teachers offered extra help after school. The cop was grateful for the support, but he never forgot that the girls were his responsibility. One of the hardest moments came when the oldest girl asked about her biological parents. The cop had always known this day would come, but he wasn't prepared for the pain in her eyes as she asked, "Why didn't they want me?" He sat her down and took her hands in his. "I don't know why they made the choices they did," he said honestly. "But I do know this, you are loved. You are wanted. And you always will be." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into a tight hug. In that moment, he realized that being a father wasn't about biology, it was about showing up, day after day, and loving them no matter what. As the years went by, the girls grew closer to each other and to the cop. They celebrated birthdays, holidays, and small victories together. They had their share of arguments and tears, but they always came back to each other. The second girl was the opposite, loud, energetic, and always on the move. She had a knack for getting into trouble, but her mischievous smile made it hard to stay mad at her for long. The cop often found himself chasing her around the house, trying to keep her out of trouble. The third girl was shy and artistic. She spent hours drawing pictures of their family, always including the cop with a big smile on his face. Her drawings were taped all over the house, a constant reminder of how much they all loved him. The fourth girl was the thinker. She asked endless questions about the world and how things worked. The cop didn't always have the answers, but he did his best to encourage her curiosity. He bought her books and took her to the library, where she would lose herself in stories about science and history. The fifth girl was the youngest, barely 4 years old when she came to live with them. She was sweet and affectionate, always clinging to the cop's leg or holding his hand. She called him Daddy from the very beginning, and though it surprised him at first, he quickly grew to love the sound of it. The sixth girl was the toughest. She'd been through more than any child should have to endure, and it showed in her guarded expression and sharp words. She didn't trust easily, and it took months before she let the cop hug her without flinching. But beneath her tough exterior was a heart that longed for love and safety. The cop did his best to give them all what they needed. He worked long hours at his job, but he always made time for the girls. He helped them with their homework, cooked their meals, and tucked them into bed at night. He wasn't perfect, there were days when he was too tired or frustrated to be the father they deserved, but he never gave up on them. Money was tight, and there were times when he wasn't sure how he'd make ends meet. But the community rallied around them. Neighbors brought over clothes and toys, and the girls' teachers offered extra help after school. The cop was grateful for the support, but he never forgot that the girls were his responsibility. One of the hardest moments came when the oldest girl asked about her biological parents. The cop had always known this day would come, but he wasn't prepared for the pain in her eyes as she asked, "Why didn't they want me?" He sat her down and took her hands in his. "I don't know why they made the choices they did," he said honestly. "But I do know this, you are loved. You are wanted. And you always will be." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into a tight hug. In that moment, he realized that being a father wasn't about biology, it was about showing up, day after day, and loving them no matter what. As the years went by, the girls grew closer to each other and to the cop. They celebrated birthdays, holidays, and small victories together. They had their share of arguments and tears, but they always came back to each other. The cop's house became a home, filled with love and laughter and the kind of chaos that only a big family can bring. But life wasn't always easy. The cop faced challenges at work, and there were times when he wondered if he was doing enough for the girls. He worried about their futures, about the scars they carried from their pasts, and about whether he could ever truly give them everything they deserved. One night, after a particularly hard day, he sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. The oldest girl came out and sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're a good dad," she said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. "You think so?" She nodded. "You're always there for us. Even when things are hard, you never give up. That's what makes you a good dad." Her words stayed with him, a reminder that he was doing something right, even on the days when it didn't feel like it. As the girls grew older, they began to find their own paths. The oldest girl dreamed of becoming a teacher, so she could help kids like her. The second girl wanted to be a chef, and she spent hours in the kitchen, experimenting with recipes. The third girl talked about going to art school, while the fourth girl dreamed of becoming a scientist. The fifth girl wanted to be a veterinarian, and the sixth girl, the toughest of them all, surprised everyone by deciding to become a social worker. The cop watched them with pride, knowing that they were growing into strong, capable women. But he also knew that their journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, both for them and for him. Little did he know, the biggest surprise of all was still to come. As the years rolled by, the cop's life became a whirlwind of school events, teenage drama, and the occasional heart-to-heart talk. The girls were no longer little children, they were growing up, and with that came new challenges. The cop had always known that raising 6 girls wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't fully prepared for the roller coaster of adolescence. The oldest girl, now a teenager, was the first to test the waters of independence. She wanted to stay out later with her friends, wear clothes the cop thought were too revealing, and spend hours on the phone. They had their fair share of arguments, but deep down, she respected him too much to push him too far. One night, after a particularly heated discussion about curfew, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. The cop sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples, wondering if he was being too strict. A few minutes later, she came back out, her anger replaced by tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to mess up. I want to make you proud." The cop stood up and pulled her into a hug. "You already do," he said. "Every single day. But part of my job is to keep you safe, even if it makes you mad at me sometimes." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I get it. I want to figure things out on my own, you know." "I know," he said. "And you will. But I'll always be here to help you when you need it." The second girl, the energetic one, had her own struggles. She was a natural leader, but her impulsiveness often got her into trouble. One day, she came home with a detention slip for talking back to a teacher. The cop sat her down and asked her what had happened. "She was being unfair," the girl exclaimed. "I was just standing up for myself." The cop listened patiently, then said, "Standing up for yourself is important, but there's a right way to do it. You're smart and strong, but you've got to learn how to channel that energy into something positive." She frowned, but he could see her thinking about his words. Over time, she started to get involved in sports and school activities, using her energy in ways that made him proud. The third girl, the artist, faced a different kind of challenge. She was quiet and sensitive, and sometimes the other kids at school didn't understand her. One day, she came home in tears because someone had made fun of her drawings. The cop sat with her at the kitchen table, looking through her sketchbook. "These are amazing," he said. "You have a real talent. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for being who you are." She sniffled, looking up at him. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "And one day, the whole world is going to see how talented you are." The fourth girl, the thinker, was always asking questions, but as she got older, her questions became more complicated. She wanted to know about the world, about right and wrong, and about why bad things happen to good people. The cop didn't always have the answers, but he did his best to guide her. One night, after a particularly deep conversation about life, she said, "I'm glad you're my dad. You always listen, even when you don't know what to say." The cop smiled. "That's what dads are for." The fifth girl, the youngest, was still his little shadow, but she was starting to come into her own. She had a big heart and a love for animals, and she often brought home stray cats or injured birds, begging the cop to let her keep them. He usually said no, but he couldn't resist her pleading eyes when she found a puppy shivering in the rain. "Can we keep him, Daddy? Please?" she asked, holding the tiny dog close to her chest. The cop sighed, knowing he was about to lose this battle. "All right," he said. "But you're responsible for him. That means feeding him, walking him, and cleaning up after him." She beamed, hugging the puppy tightly. "I will. I promise." The sixth girl, the tough one, was the hardest to reach. She still carried the scars of her past, and she often pushed people away before they could get too close. But the cop never gave up on her. He made sure she knew she was loved, even when she didn't want to hear it. One night, after a particularly bad day, she broke down in tears. "I don't know why I'm like this," she said. I don't know how to let people in." The cop sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," he said. "Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, very slowly, she began to open up. She started to trust him, and in doing so, she started to trust herself. As the girls grew older, the cop realized that his role was changing. He wasn't just their protector anymore, he was their guide, helping them navigate the challenges of growing up. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. And then, just when he thought he had everything under control, life threw him another curveball. Life had settled into a rhythm for the cop and his 6 girls. The house was always buzzing with activity, homework, chores, and the occasional sibling squabble. But just when he thought he had everything under control, new challenges began to arise. The oldest girl was now in high school, and with that came the pressures of grades, friendships, and planning for the future. She had her heart set on becoming a teacher, but the road to achieving that dream wasn't easy. One evening, she came home with a report card that wasn't as good as she'd hoped. She slammed her backpack on the kitchen table and burst into tears. "I'm never going to get into college," she sobbed. "I'm not smart enough." The cop sat down beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, listen to me. One bad grade doesn't define you. You're one of the smartest, most determined people I know. You'll get through this." She looked up at him, her eyes red and puffy. "But what if I don't? What if I let everyone down?" "You won't," he said firmly. "And even if you stumble along the way, that's okay. What matters is that you keep going. I'll be here to help you, no matter what." Her tears slowed, and she managed a small smile. "Thanks, Dad." The second girl, the energetic one, was facing her own set of challenges. She had joined the school's soccer team, and while she loved the sport, she struggled with balancing practice, schoolwork, and her social life. One night, she came home late after a game, exhausted and frustrated. "I can't do it all," she said, collapsing onto the couch. "I'm so tired all the time, and I feel like I'm failing at everything." The cop sat down next to her, handing her a glass of water. "You're not failing," he said. "You're just learning how to juggle a lot of things at once. It's okay to ask for help when you need it." She sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I just don't want to let the team down." "You won't," he said. "But you've got to take care of yourself, too. Maybe we can figure out a schedule that works better for you." Over the next few weeks, they worked together to create a routine that allowed her to manage her time more effectively. She still had her moments of stress, but she started to feel more in control. The third girl, the artist, was struggling with self-doubt. She had entered a local art competition, but as the deadline approached, she began to second-guess herself. "What if my work isn't good enough?" she asked, staring at her latest painting. The cop stood beside her, studying the vibrant colors and intricate details. "This is incredible," he said. "You have a gift, and it's important to share it with the world. Even if you don't win, you should be proud of what you've created." She bit her lip, still unsure. "But what if people don't like it?" "Not everyone will," he said honestly. "But that doesn't mean it's not worth sharing. The most important thing is that you're true to yourself." With his encouragement, she submitted her painting. A few weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. She had won second place. The look of pride on her face was worth more than any trophy. The fourth girl, the thinker, was grappling with bigger questions. She had started to question the world around her, and sometimes her curiosity led to difficult conversations. "Why do bad things happen to good people?" she asked one night, her brow furrowed in thought. The cop sighed, knowing there was no easy answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that we can't control everything that happens. What we can control is how we respond to it." We can choose to be kind, to help others, and to make the world a little better in our own way. She nodded, still deep in thought. I want to do that, she said. I want to make a difference. You already do, he said. Just by being you. The fifth girl, the youngest, was facing a challenge of her own. She had started school, and while she was excited to make new friends, she was also shy and unsure of herself. What if no one likes me? She asked, clutching her backpack tightly. The cop knelt down to her level, smiling gently. They'll like you, he said. You're kind, funny, and smart. Just be yourself, and the right people will see how amazing you are. She nodded, still nervous but a little more confident. When she came home that afternoon, she was beaming. I made a friend, she exclaimed, running into the house. The cop smiled, his heart swelling with pride. That's great, kiddo. I knew you would. The sixth girl, the tough one, was still struggling to let people in. She had started to open up more, but there were still moments when she shut down, retreating into herself. One night, after a particularly bad day, she sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The cop joined her, sitting quietly beside her. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, he said. But I'm here if you do. She was silent for a long time, but finally, she spoke. I don't know how to trust people. Every time I do, I get hurt. The cop nodded, understanding. It's hard, he said. But not everyone will hurt you. There are people who care about you, who want to be there for you. You don't have to face everything alone. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. I'm trying, she whispered. I know, he said. And that's all anyone can ask. Just keep trying, and I'll be here every step of the way. As the girls faced their individual challenges, the cop realized that his role was evolving. He wasn't just their protector anymore, he was their guide, their cheerleader, and their safe place to fall. It wasn't always easy, but it was the most rewarding thing he'd ever done. And then, just when he thought they were all finding their footing, life threw them another curveball. The cop had always known that life wasn't predictable, but he hadn't expected the storm that hit their family next. It started small, as these things often do, but it quickly grew into something that tested them all. The oldest girl, now a senior in high school, was preparing for college applications. She had worked hard to maintain her grades and was determined to get into a good school. But one afternoon, she came home with a pale face and trembling hands. Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I messed up. The cop looked up from the newspaper he was reading. What happened? She handed him a letter from the school. It was a notice about a missed deadline for a scholarship application, one she had been counting on to help pay for college. I thought I had more time, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I was so focused on my grades, and I forgot. The cop's heart ached for her. He knew how much she had been counting on that scholarship. But he also knew that panicking wouldn't help. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Let's figure this out. There's got to be another way. They spent the next few days researching other scholarships, grants, and financial aid options. It was overwhelming, but the cop refused to let her give up. We'll find a way, he said firmly. You've worked too hard to let this stop you. Her determination returned, and she threw herself into applying for every opportunity she could find. It wasn't easy, but she refused to let one mistake define her future. The second girl, the soccer player, faced her own setback. During a big game, she twisted her ankle and had to be carried off the field. The doctor said she would need weeks of rest and physical therapy before she could play again. This is the worst, she groaned, lying on the couch with her foot propped up. I'm letting the team down. The cop handed her an ice pack and sat down beside her. You're not letting anyone down, he said. Injuries happen. What matters is how you come back from them. She sighed, frustrated but determined. I'll do whatever it takes to get back on the field. That's the spirit, he said. And in the meantime, you can still support your team. Sometimes being a leader means knowing when to step back and let others shine. The third girl, the artist, faced a different kind of challenge. She had been accepted into a prestigious art program, but the cost was more than they could afford. I don't want to be a burden, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe I should just forget about it. The cop shook his head. You're not a burden, he said firmly. We'll figure this out. You've got too much talent to let this opportunity slip away. They started brainstorming ways to raise the money, selling her artwork, organizing a fundraiser, even reaching out to local businesses for sponsorships. It was a long shot, but the cop was determined to help her chase her dream. The fourth girl, the thinker, was struggling with a personal loss. Her best friend had moved away, and she was feeling lonely and isolated. I don't know how to make new friends, she admitted one night. It's like everyone already has their own group, and I don't fit in. The cop listened, his heart breaking for her. It's hard to start over, he said. But you're an amazing person. Give it time, and the right people will find you. He encouraged her to join clubs and activities where she could meet people with similar interests. Slowly, she began to make new connections, and while it wasn't the same as her old friendship, it helped her feel less alone. The fifth girl, the youngest, was dealing with her own struggles. She had been diagnosed with a learning disability, and school was becoming increasingly difficult for her. I'm not as smart as the other kids, she said, her voice small and defeated. The cop knelt down to her level, looking her in the eye. You are smart, he said firmly. You just learn differently, and that's okay. We'll get you the help you need, and you'll figure this out. I believe in you. He worked with her teachers to create a plan that would support her learning style. It wasn't easy, but she started to make progress, and her confidence began to grow. The sixth girl, the tough one, faced the biggest challenge of all. She had started to open up more, but old wounds still haunted her. One night, she had a panic attack, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The cop sat with her, holding her hand and speaking in a calm, steady voice. You're safe, he said. Just breathe. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. It took time, but she slowly began to calm down. When she could speak again, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be, he said. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to not be okay. We'll get through this together. He started looking into therapy options for her, knowing she needed more help than he could give. It wasn't an easy conversation, but she agreed to give it a try. As the cop helped each of his girls navigate their challenges, he realized how much they had grown. They were no longer the scared, lost children he had taken in, they were strong, resilient young women who were learning to face life's obstacles head-on. But just when he thought they were turning a corner, life threw them another curveball, one that would test them all in ways they never expected. The cop had always prided himself on being strong, for his job, for his community, and most importantly, for his girls. But one day, that strength was put to the ultimate test. It started with a pain in his chest. At first, he brushed it off as stress or maybe just a pulled muscle from work. But when the pain didn't go away and instead grew sharper, he knew something was wrong. He tried to hide it from the girls, not wanting to worry them, but the oldest girl noticed immediately. Dad, you look pale, she said, her brow furrowed with concern. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine, he said, forcing a smile. Just tired. But later that night, the pain became unbearable. He collapsed in the kitchen, clutching his chest. The girls, hearing the noise, rushed in and found him on the floor. Dad, the second girl screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. The oldest girl grabbed the phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. The others crowded around him, their faces filled with fear. "Stay with us, Dad," the third girl pleaded, tears streaming down her face. The cop tried to reassure them, but the pain was too much. He could see the panic in their eyes, and it broke his heart. He had always been their rock, their safe place, and now he was the one causing them pain. The paramedics arrived quickly, loading him into the ambulance. The girls followed in a neighbor's car, their faces pale and their hands clasped tightly together. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests and determined that he had suffered a heart attack. The news hit the girls like a punch to the gut. "Is he going to be okay?" the fourth girl asked, her voice trembling. The doctor nodded. "He's stable now, but he's going to need a lot of rest and care. He's lucky you got him here when you did." The girls were allowed to see him briefly, and they crowded around his hospital bed, their eyes filled with tears. "You scared us," the fifth girl said, her small hand gripping his. The cop looked at them, his heart aching. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "I didn't mean to worry you." "You're not allowed to leave us," the sixth girl said, her voice fierce despite the tears in her eyes. "You promised." He nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I promise." Over the next few days, the girls took turns staying by his side, refusing to leave him alone. They brought him books, told him stories, and even tried to make him laugh, though their jokes were tinged with worry. When he was finally discharged, the doctor gave him strict instructions to take it easy. "No stress, no heavy lifting, and definitely no overworking," the doctor said. "You need to focus on your health." The cop nodded, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had always been the one taking care of others, not the other way around. The girls, however, had other plans. They rallied together, determined to take care of him the way he had always taken care of them. The oldest girl took charge of the household, making sure bills were paid and groceries were bought. The second girl handled the cooking, though her meals were often hit or miss. The third girl kept the house clean, while the fourth girl helped with homework and school projects. The fifth girl made sure he took his medication on time, and the sixth girl, the toughest of them all, became his constant shadow, making sure he didn't overdo it. "You're not allowed to lift a finger," the second girl said, pointing a wooden spoon at him. "Doctor's orders." The cop chuckled, though it still hurt to laugh. "I think you're enjoying this a little too much," he said. "Maybe," she said with a grin. "But you've been bossing us around for years. It's our turn now." Despite their teasing, the cop could see how much they cared. They were scared, he could see it in their eyes, but they were determined to be strong for him, just as he had always been strong for them. One night, as he sat on the porch, the oldest girl joined him. She sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay, right?" she asked quietly. He put an arm around her, pulling her close. "I'm going to do everything I can to be here for you," he said. "But you girls, you've shown me how strong you are. Even if something happens to me, I know you'll be okay." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "We need you, Dad. You're our family." He hugged her tightly, his own eyes filling with tears. "And you're mine," he said. "Always." As the weeks went by, the cop began to regain his strength. The girls continued to take care of him, but they also started to rely on each other more. They had always been close, but this crisis brought them even closer. The cop watched them with pride, knowing that they were growing into strong, capable women. But he also knew that their journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, both for them and for him. And then, just when he thought they were turning a corner, life threw them another curveball, one that would change everything. The cop's recovery was slow but steady. The girls continued to take care of him, but as he regained his strength, he began to take back some of the responsibilities he had always handled. Still, the experience had changed them all. The girls had proven they could step up when needed, and the cop had learned to accept help, even when it was hard. But just as life seemed to be settling back into a rhythm, a new challenge arose, one that would test them in ways they hadn't expected. The oldest girl was preparing to leave for college. She had worked tirelessly to secure scholarships and financial aid, and her hard work had paid off. She had been accepted into a good school, and while she was excited, she was also nervous. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked one night, sitting at the kitchen table with her acceptance letter in hand. The cop sat down across from her, smiling gently. "You're more ready than you think," he said. "You've faced so much already, and you've come out stronger every time. This is just the next step in your journey." She nodded, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I don't want to leave you guys. What if something happens while I'm gone?" "We'll be okay," he said. "And you're not going far. You can come home whenever you need to. But this is your time to shine, to chase your dreams. Don't let fear hold you back." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "Thanks, Dad. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," he said. "I'll always be here, no matter where life takes you." The second girl, the soccer player, was also facing a big change. Her hard work and determination had paid off, and she had been offered a scholarship to play soccer at a nearby college. "I can't believe it," she said, staring at the offer letter. "All those hours of practice, all the injuries, it was worth it." The cop smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "I always knew you had it in you," he said. "But this is just the beginning. You've got a bright future ahead of you." She grinned, but then her expression turned serious. "What about you guys? I don't want to leave you all behind." "You're not leaving us behind," he said. "You're moving forward, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do. We'll be here, cheering you on every step of the way." The third girl, the artist, had also received exciting news. Her artwork had been selected for a gallery exhibit, and she was invited to attend the opening night. "I can't believe people actually want to see my work," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Of course they do," the cop said. "You're incredibly talented. This is your moment to shine." She smiled, but he could see the nerves in her eyes. "What if I mess up? What if people don't like it?" "They will," he said. "But even if they don't, that doesn't change how amazing you are. This is your chance to share your gift with the world. Don't let fear stop you." The fourth girl, the thinker, was also preparing for a new chapter. She had been accepted into a summer program for young scientists, and she was thrilled but nervous. "What if I'm not smart enough?" she asked one night, her brow furrowed in worry. The cop shook his head. "You're one of the smartest people I know," he said. "This program is lucky to have you. Just be yourself, and you'll do great." She nodded, still unsure but a little more confident. The fifth girl, the youngest, was also growing up fast. She had started to find her place in school, and her love for animals had only grown stronger. "I want to be a vet," she announced one day, her eyes shining with determination. The cop smiled, ruffling her hair. "I think you'd make an amazing vet," he said. "You've got the heart for it." She grinned, but then her expression turned serious. "What if I'm not good enough?" "You are," he said. "And you'll only get better with time. Just keep working hard, and you'll get there." The sixth girl, the tough one, was also making progress. She had started therapy, and while it wasn't easy, she was beginning to open up more. I think I'm starting to feel better," she said one night, her voice quiet but hopeful. The cop smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You've come so far, and I know you'll keep getting stronger." She nodded, a small smile on her face. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." As the girls prepared for their new chapters, the cop realized how much they had grown. They were no longer the scared, lost children he had taken in, they were strong, capable young women, ready to take on the world. But just when he thought they were all moving forward, life threw them another curveball, one that would bring them all back together in a way they never expected. The cop had always known that his girls were special, but he had no idea just how much they had grown until the day they surprised him with a gift that left him speechless. It started with a simple family dinner. The girls had insisted on cooking, and while the meal wasn't perfect, the second girl had burned the garlic bread, and the fifth girl had accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the dessert. It was filled with love and laughter. The cop sat at the head of the table, watching them with pride. They had all come so far, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. After dinner, the oldest girl stood up, clearing her throat. "We have something we want to give you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The cop raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You didn't have to get me anything," he said. "Just having you all here is enough." The girls exchanged knowing smiles, and the second girl handed him a small box. "Open it," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. The cop took the box, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of surprises. He opened the box and found a key inside. "What's this?" he asked, confused. The third girl grinned. "It's a key to your new house," she said. The cop stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. "My new house?" The fourth girl nodded. "We've been saving up for years," she said. "We wanted to do something to thank you for everything you've done for us." The fifth girl chimed in, her voice filled with excitement. "It's got a big backyard for the puppy, and a studio for her," she said, pointing to the third girl.